Namaskar, Vanakam, welcome back to the Vegan Veranda with Gaurav and Chalta Firta Zebra. Today we have a very special guest with us. This is DesiPrism from Instagram. So, Gaurav, what do you think about how we run, how we reconcile our, religion plays a really good important part in our life, right? So, how do you reconcile that with veganism?
Like our long-term listeners would already know that we have a very neutral approach to veganism. We have never shared our political leanings on any of our vegan content, and we plan to keep it that way at least until 95% of the world gets vegan. That at that point I think we might be comfortable revealing. But before that, we are just curious to figure out people who have different religious backgrounds, people who have different belief faith systems, how do they relate that to veganism? Because for a lot of people that can be the starting point. For us it was getting into seminars, watching videos about animal cruelty. We really connected with the emotional aspect of it, with the logical aspect of it. But there are so many people who think about different religious backgrounds. So our social media specialist Aravind ji Sahib got us some connections with a very interesting account on Instagram, and let us introduce him today.
So I just went on Instagram and some of my friends suggested this page at DesiPrism, and I just went in. I was just I loved the visuals. The posters were all really well designed, and there was this one particular post that got my attention, and it was we'll put it on the screen, at least the first part. I'll put the link in the description so you can check it out. Basically, whether India will learn ethics from the West. And this is like a recurring theme in India, right? Like when you bring about veganism or any other movement for that matter, they usually come up with this. People usually come up with this response that, oh, this is like a Western idea.
Yeah, it's not compatible with my religion.
Yeah, it's not compatible with my religion, my culture. It's kind of a foreign concept. Some people even view it as kind of a colonial approach.
Yeah.
So that is what this particular post was talking about, and I was just enamored, and I wanted to get this person on the podcast so that we could discuss this particular aspect and the peripherals of this particular aspect. So thank you very much for joining us, Sita from DesiPrism. We would like to know what do you how do you come to this particular conclusion? How did you arrive at veganism? What got you started? So just let us know.
First of all, let us get an idea of what his online work is about.
Oh yeah, sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that works too.
Yeah, please introduce.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for having me. So I'm glad I could meet you guys, and we're able to do this. So talking about my page, I have done similar things in the past. I've run different pages, different YouTube channels. I used to write on Medium, under different names. I used to do this since I was maybe 17, 18, since the early days of my university. So today I'm 24. So I have been doing this for quite a few years. And DesiPrism is something I just thought of starting during the pandemic. So it was last year. So I had some free time. So it's all work from home. So I decided, okay, I'll have to restart this, but maybe in a more appealing way. So that's the reason I've spent a lot of time creating all the graphics and all. Even if someone sees my page, they would know. From the time I started to the recent months, the earlier posts are obviously much less appealing in the terms of visual quality or something. I've also been growing in that sense. So I just wanted to learn. I just wanted to just learn this and see how effective social media could be for any message. It could be political, religious, something ethical message like veganism. So since I understood this since a pretty early age, at least 8 years ago. So I have been doing that. But since I could get some time now last year. So I just started. It's just over a year ago, I guess. I started DesiPrism. So yeah, I just wanted to cover more topics, and of course, since 8 years ago and now, I've also been like reading so much, learning so much about all these issues that I talk about on my page. So I decided like I think I'll have to revisit this kind of a some sort of a social media where I could give some information out. So that's the primary aim of my page. That's the reason if you see my page, almost I think 90% plus of the posts would be 10 slides. So I don't do a single slide post kind of thing. I don't do like something like memes or something. So I don't do all that. I do like heavy information, and if you see like all the slides are almost completely filled. So that's the reason I used to write on like Medium. I used to write articles, or whenever I used to do a YouTube channel, and I used to do long form like videos as well. So I realized like that is not something that you can do on Instagram, something like which is only like appealing to more images, and it has to look good, it has to be appealing to get a wider audience. So understanding that, and also not compromising on actually diluting any of the info, so I decided to just learn doing some good graphics and presenting the info in the best way possible, which is appealing, and but still it has a lot of text, so you'll ultimately have to read it. So I know that this is what I want to do, and I decided okay, I'll want to start this kind of a thing and cover all the topics that I cover on my page. So I cover many Indic issues, politics, religions, geopolitics, veganism, so many things I cover on there. So whatever I feel that I like and that interests me, I just wanted to like have an outlet for that and present it in a way that people can like get a summary of at least of the primary arguments of whatever I'm talking about, or in some cases just pure facts. There is not even an argument being presented, it's just some facts that people don't know. It's just like a nice place to collate it. And so yeah, I mean that's the idea of the page, and that's what I see the page to be, and that's what I want to continue doing on that page. And yeah, that's about DesiPrism.
So would you say like my initial impression upon looking up your work was, first of all, the images are too good to be done by any amateur. It looks very nice. Mm-hmm. So secondly, would you say that the overarching theme of your online work right now, is it related to more of Indic and Hinduism or Indian civilizational issues?
I mean, absolutely. I think that is an like all-encompassing kind of a framework from which like a lot of Indians should be operating under, especially after like at least 1,000 years of colonization, and then now all the neo-colonization that we see, where actually like a country isn't occupying you, but the entire like the space of ideas, and in the spaces of how what progress should look like, what development should look like what what just in the era of time, what would any society should go towards. So this kind of a thing where like large majority of Indians are still operating under colonial frameworks or some alien frameworks which are not completely in line with what actually are the realities about their own civilization, history, culture, all these things. So my primary aim, since I've been like learning, engaging and interacting with these kinds of issues since I don't know when I was, I think maybe 13 or 14. Since then I've been listening to like all sorts of things like politics, religion, and so I had this idea that large majority of people, what they're trying to the way they're looking at basically their own society, their own identity, their own consciousness and their history, this is all not entirely their own ideas. These are imported from somewhere else. They don't make sense to a person who really understands any of these issues at some, not even at a great depth, not at like some academic level, but even at a like an amateur level. If you do a basic reading of any of these issues about India and the current context and its history, I realized pretty early on that people aren't operating from a framework that would make ultimately sense to them without having a lot of internal conflicts. So since I understood that, and since I see that everywhere, so I would obviously say that is the overarching theme, what I would want to do with anywhere, like my work, my activism around veganism, or just the page that I do, or wherever I talk in my day-to-day interactions, how much ever I can try to do, that's what I would focus my energies around. And that's what once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's a simple way to put it. So since I see some of these things, at least now I think that it's a good thing to comment on it. It's a good thing to talk about it. So yes, the page overall would be something in that falling under that framework.
So what got me interested is that since you basically, since all three of us are technically in the same age bracket now that I know that, so what makes me curious is that what what made you, was it some kind of childhood experience, some kind of story? Did that influence your position right now, especially concerning veganism and maybe Indic thought, or was it like purely like from a factual perspective?
I mean, two things. On veganism, I'll get to it because I think it's a bit more complicated how my ideas have developed over time. But on just the Indic issues, I think it's been there since, at least as far as I can recollect it in any coherent way, from my early teens. So I would say maybe 11 onwards, I definitely was engaging with this. So I mean, like back at my home when I was growing up, we used to have like I don't know, at least close to 1,000 books at my home. So we had like a mini library kind of a thing, and I don't know, we had like at least some 6-7 bookshelves at our home, and there were a lot of books around everything. From my childhood, I used to have all the like I don't know, comic books and stuff like, and all the Indian comics and all these things. And also we had a lot of like literature, so just general literature, like could be anything like fiction. And then we also had a lot of religious books. So I mean, they were always there. Like my parents used to read a little bit because I mean they're always busy in work and everything else, so they used to read, but ultimately they always used to buy books wherever they could find them. And I remember still used to going to book exhibitions and all whenever I was a kid, and whatever book we had, we just used to buy it. Even if you ultimately end up reading it or not, we always, I mean, there was no kind of a resistance towards getting more books or having them at your home. So I think that's what, so I read some of those books since I mean, at least since I was a teenager, when I could understand beyond basic like comic books or basic like the moral lessons that are taught to kids in like small stories and all. So beyond that, once I could have some intellectual capacity, I think I started reading some of those books, started reading some literature and all these things. So I mean, yeah, those are the things that definitely at least laid a framework for me, which basically maybe ensured to some extent to prevent any future brainwashing that could occur. Because I see a lot of brainwashing that people undergo, especially like Indians, because as we discussed about the colonization and all those things. So that is because they are like not connected to the roots, in the sense that they don't even have a basic idea. Again, as I said, not at any great detail, but even a basic idea about their epistemology, about their history and all these things. So I think just having even a little bit of information, because I wasn't reading so many books, I was reading a few books, but I knew what was in them. I knew what was the overall picture being presented, where they're approaching these issues from with respect to religion, anything, politics, anything like that. So once I understood that, I think that was what helped me, prevented me from getting brainwashed to a great degree. Of course, all of us are colonized to a certain extent, but I think that was what helped me, and that's what I think was the foundations for my views around many Indic issues. So that's what I think helped me a lot. And then eventually I started like going on the internet. I think I had my computer when I was like around the same time, I think 10-11. So I just used to play games. When I was a kid, I used to play, I don't know, RPGs. I used to play all sorts of games. So then we had an internet connection, and so I just started going on the internet. I started reading Wikipedia. I started going on YouTube, finding videos on all these topics. So then, I mean, pretty early on, I could see the differences of worldviews, because today what we see is, as I said, kind of a universalization of one specific worldview towards everyone else in the world, and calling that as some sort of a universal standard. So that kind of a thing I could immediately recognize, because I could easily understand what kind of a different starting points that these two, especially the Western and the Indic positions, are coming from. So that kind of a thing, I mean, it's a gradual process, but yes, I think those were the early formative years in which I could see a bit more clearly, I guess, than many others who were just not interested in these issues, or who are just going along with the flow and are being subject to a lot of brainwashing and propaganda, to which they couldn't have any counter, because they don't have any firm rooting in this. So that's the entire journey of my views around any Indic issues. But veganism, I think, is a bit more complex, because obviously I wasn't aware of veganism when I was growing up, but I was a vegetarian my whole life, and I always thought that because I was a vegetarian. I mean, I also play roller hockey. So I played till the nationals. I captained my state team, and my own brother plays for the Indian team. Like he's a nation gold medalist. So, so I mean, as a vegetarian kid, I think most people hear that, oh, like vegetarians are weak, or something like this is not something like a manly thing. So all the usual things that we hear in Indian culture. So that kind of things I heard, but it was never like true to me, because I was captaining my team. I was playing a lot of sports. I was practicing a lot. So I never saw that. I used to play other sports as well. So I never saw that to be the case. So then immediately I realized, okay, this is not true. Like, why are people saying this? This can't be true, because and then you find other examples of obviously vegetarians who are strong, who are not some sort of non-manly thing. So that didn't make any sense to me. So then I started thinking about it, and also the other thing about seeing other vegetarians who are like kind of apologetic about their being vegetarian, or kind of under peer pressure, either like accepting that they won't be vegetarian any longer and actually going ahead and consuming like meat and other animal products. And I've seen just people being very shy about their views. So that also didn't make any sense to me, because for me there was I saw it as at least equal to anything else, as like a diet, because I wasn't thinking anything beyond diet at this point, because in India it's primarily diet if you're a vegetarian, non-vegetarian. So that's how veganism is slightly different from these two things. So once I understood that, it didn't make much sense to me. So but I was always making this argument, because as far as I can remember, that why would anyone need to eat meat? Like, what's the point of this? Because all we hear always is there's a protein in that, or this makes you stronger. Once I realized it's not true at all, in my own personal example, and my brother and everyone else I know who are vegetarians. So at that point itself, it struck me somewhere that like this can't be the case. Like, why are people eating meat? Like, what's the reason for this? So morally, I think because most vegetarians don't make a moral case. Like most vegetarians, it's
Right.
cultural for them, it's religious for them, and they're, as I said, either apologetic about it or wouldn't want to talk about it, or ultimately cave to the pressure. So once I saw that this is not the case, I had that view that like there is no need to eat animals. But of course at that point I didn't have any well-developed views on ethics or anything beyond that. But I could understand that. So we'll get into it ultimately how I went vegan and all that. You guys can just respond. But yes, so ultimately when I was going vegan, all these things made perfect sense to me. So there was never any conflict when I actually got to know what veganism is and all the other things around it. Yeah.
I think that initial, exposure to researching and literature and books at an early age, I guess it would have also, been a major factor in your discovering about veganism, and then, figuring out whether it really makes sense, putting all the things together, and, forming a view that you want to go vegan. So was that what your first introduction to veganism was like? And where did you hear about the term? Did you like read about it? How long did you spend thinking about it or researching about it?
Mm-hmm. Sure. I mean, I think the thing about reading books in general, so I think that helps anyone, because it would just widen your scope, and especially today, right? Like students, children who are like who are doing the schooling, like primary, secondary schools, like beyond the syllabus which they are supposed to like by heart it, or they're supposed to just vomit it in the exam paper. So beyond that, there is no like encouragement of actually reading any books. So as I said, I was playing sports, which is a contradictory thing, because people who usually play sports either are not interested in academics, or
Yeah.
people who are deeply into studying and learning and all, they are not like doing anything else beyond that. But again, that was so these kind of stereotypes I think have always struck me as something odd, because I was doing both the things, and I used to actually take like I don't know, like 2 months of every school year, just to like go to the national camp, state camp, practice there morning and evening. And I could have gone to school for a few hours in between, but I didn't want to. So we just used to take permission, because it's like a national event where they're representing the state. So the school was more than willing to give us, and I found all that time, because obviously if you're decently like smart enough, I don't think it would be a big thing for you to clear your schooling, because this is all pretty easy. Like there's nothing, it will challenge a person who is actually interested or inclined academically. So once I realized that like you could pass all the exams with the best grades you can without actually breaking your head
Yeah.
year round by going over the same syllabus and the few books which are already outdated. By the time you're reading them, they're already outdated. So that's when I think I had a lot of time to actually read all these things and, as I said, go on the internet and learn, watch everything. So that definitely had a role. So yes, I mean, my journey or my introduction towards veganism is something on the same lines. I was in my, I think, second year at university. So I was 17. I think I'll be just turning 18 at that point. So again, I was just looking through some philosophy channels. I was just watching some videos, ethics, all these things. And I came across a debate on veganism. And so I was like, I don't even remember like how I even clicked on it or what I felt at that point, because I was just, okay, this is interesting, let me click on it. And I clicked on the video, and basically they were making the case that, as I said earlier, like what's the need? I think this was the case they were making. Like, what's the need for any human being who's living like in any civilization to have any animals, to consume any animal products? So that was the primary thing, and immediately it stuck with me. Yes, like exactly, like what is this? What is the need for that? And then on top of that, they were also talking about, if there is no need, so is it actually ethical now? Because you're not someone who's living in a forest where there's no agriculture, for example. That was the example that stuck with me the first time I heard it. So you're living in civilization where you can eat all plant-based sources of food, and a lifestyle you can live like that pretty easily. So what's the need for you to kill any animal or exploit any animal? And if there is no such need for you to actually do that, would it be ethical to do that in the first place? So these are the two things. I don't even remember like what channel where I was watching it, but these were the primary arguments they were using, and it absolutely made sense to me. And I went vegan overnight. Like that was I think I don't know, I came back from college, I think it was 7 in the evening or something. I was watching that video, and I watched the entire, like, I don't know, 1 hour, 1.5 hour video, and it made sense to me. It was like, obviously. So in that video again, someone brought up dairy, because vegetarians are, I think there was some vegetarian or something, or someone was just bringing up the treatment of cows. And then I watched that because I was a vegetarian. So obviously I was fine with all the meat and flesh and everything else. But they, to my fortunate circumstance, they brought up dairy, and I heard that. Absolutely, it made sense to me immediately. And overnight I went at least plant-based, because then other products, other things like your, I don't know, like the kind of cosmetics you use, like shampoos, everything else, I just had to like figure out eventually in the coming weeks. But immediately I realized that there's no point, like this is inconsistent if you are actually holding other beings to have any moral worth. But the way people act, if you're a non-vegan, in basically either doing it yourself or paying someone else to do all these kinds of exploitation and inflict suffering upon others. So I realized that, and that's it. I think I was just turning 18 then, and my second year of uni, and that's when I turned vegan. I think it's a very straightforward journey for me. I never watched documentaries like Dominion. I don't think it was out back then, but I never watched even other documentaries which were out based on basically about like cruelty footage, nothing like that, because it made enough sense to me, because I don't need to see the footage for it to make sense to me, because it was pretty clear. And it's only much later when I went back to my uni after I graduated, when we did a screening of Dominion, and we went back and did it. So I never even like watched any of those videos till much later. So that's it. I think that was my first introduction, and I think immediately it made sense to me, and immediately turned vegan overnight.
I just wanted to mention that you meant, like, I agree with what you said. Like, most vegetarians don't appeal from this ethical perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually kind of very different. Like, even when I was like a vegetarian, so I used to have this like a band of 2-3 friends who were also vegetarians, and at that point I used to like badger other basically meat eaters, carnivores, and we used to argue on ethical points basically. And I was cleaning through my closet, and I found that we had designed an ID card and like this logo thing for our organization at that point. I'll put it in the edit. We'll put it on the screen so that you could check it out. But it was really cool. It was just generic, like no non-veg campaign or something like that. And then, dude, like people usually hear plants feel pain either because after going vegan, or when they are like vocal vegetarians, what we used to call. So vegetarians are usually apologetic people, as Sita has already mentioned. But like there are vocal people who are like, no, you shouldn't eat them or something like that. But then because of the lack of information and the lack of maybe intellectual capacity at that point, we didn't make the connection with dairy. And what feels bad retrospectively is that we used to suggest people to like eat paneer instead of eating meat.
Yes.
which is like extremely stupid at this point if you think about it, like retrospectively. But so it's kind of really interesting that there are people who used to think of vegetarianism from an ethical perspective. But what was also like interesting is that we also never made the connection about leather. We never made the connection about wool, etc. Because things are so normalized at this point. And
Even silk.
silk, especially because I think there is a touch of religion everywhere. Like when you think about it, there is a touch of religion. Like it's okay, leather is kind of permitted for us vegetarians, silk is permitted. In fact, silk is encouraged. Like if you go to like an Indian wedding, it's considered blasphemous if the bride is not wearing a silk sari.
In some communities it is that way. I think a little bit we'll just tell him about our journey in a very short form. Like I a few years ago, when was this? I think 2017 or something, I chanced upon this video on YouTube called Draw My Life Cow Edition. It was an animated video made by, I think it was PETA India. So it was just an animated video of a female calf that is just born, and the emotions that she's going through when she figures out like why is my mother being treated like this, and why what is happening to me. So eventually, after the mother is taken away, then this calf also, she's also going to meet the same fate as the other animals are. So that was a very emotional moment for me, which I connected with that. I actually cried after watching that video. So my younger brother, he came up after playing with his friends. I made him watch that video, and at that moment, we decided that if we are going to go vegan, it doesn't matter, if we are not going to get to eat anything. Like I was a big dairy fan. I used to enjoy, milk, coffee, and paneer and dahi or curd, all the things. So we didn't think about like what will happen next. We just, went for it. No information, don't know what to eat, don't know how I will, supplement what I'll eat. Just went into it overnight. I was aware of this term called veganism for about a year, but I was under the impression like no, ये अपने country में नहीं होता है, अपने in our country we don't treat cows that way. We are cow respecting people. So I didn't think about it. And even Apuda, I think he also went vegan overnight. So he'll just tell us shortly.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's kind of a different story. So I met Aravind animal activist when he came to my college.
Oh,
and
wow.
this is like so so he lectured in my college, and I was forced to sit into the lecture. I didn't even so it was literally like forcing me to sit into a lecture.
You know how the professors, they'll ask students to fill up the audience.
Fill up the rooms, auditoriums, yeah. So I wasn't even supposed to be there, but then I come out as the only vegan out of that room. So after that, I have a very traditional conservative kind of family. So I had to dupe them for 2 months, or longer. Probably how long did
I guess 6 months. I guess 6 months.
No, it was probably more than a year.
Okay.
I had to dupe them for more than a year. I used to tell, no, I don't want to eat this. I don't want to eat that. I'll just pretend to. I'll make my own peanut curd and pretend to eat that instead of curd rice in order to give them the illusion that I'm still having dairy. And I tried so much gymnastics, but yeah, I tried all that, and I basically Pavloved my family into me accepting my veganism. So yeah, that's kind of it's kind of interesting how people take different views, and there are people who go vegan overnight. But most importantly, I think all three of us have one thing in commonality, is that maybe more, but one main thing in commonality is that neither of us were persuaded essentially by the cruelty footage or slaughterhouse footage or anything. It was non-graphic content, which usually sure, Aravind showed some graphic footage in the lecture, but it wasn't the footage that caught my eye. It was probably the way he
The
About the
ethics.
lecture.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, just Gaurav was making a point that most vegetarians, when they see this footage or documentaries, like their immediate justification, because of course, if they think that is something what they're doing is bad, they can't do it anymore. So even after seeing this footage, they'll be having this kind of internal justification that it doesn't happen here. So I think the good thing that at least the way I just introduced myself to the entire thing was like, because it ultimately doesn't matter if you're, I don't know, milking a cow with a milking machine, or if you're doing it with your hands, because the point that actually matters is that you can't exploit or you can't steal an animal's milk, which is not meant for humans or anyone else, but only for their babies. So even if it doesn't matter, even if they do it a different way or something, because that's exploitation at the end of the day. You can't be stealing anything else. So that's the reason. Maybe we are jumping ahead, but we'll cover this like a little bit later regarding activism and all that stuff. But that's what videos work for a lot of people. But because graphic footage obviously moves people, and it will at least shock them if they are not aware of what's happening, all that stuff. But a vast majority of people, because people already in many other aspects of their life are perfectly fine with holding contradictory views. It could be religion, could be politics, anything. Like they are fine with already having inconsistencies in their belief, like even personal hypocrisies. They would say others to do something and they wouldn't do it themselves, all these things. So people are pretty like as a species, we are very capable of doing that. So that's the thing. I feel like whenever videos are shown, if it doesn't accompany, that's the reason I like something like street activism. And I did over the last 3 years a lot of street activism because of that reason. It can't just be a video where they're watching it on the internet or somewhere. It has to accompany, that has to be accompanied with actually you talking to them, and then you actually providing a context around what exactly is that's happening. Because as Gaurav said, many people have this, they just see and have some weird justifications internally that it doesn't happen here or whatever, because that's not the point. Ultimately, it's not the level of cruelty. Even if you're doing slightly less cruel than someone else, it ultimately makes no difference to the animal itself, because it's exploitation and it's ultimately suffering. So yeah, we'll discuss that at length, I think, a little bit ahead. But yes, I think that's what I felt when you brought up that point about people saying it doesn't happen here, or we don't do it in that way or whatever, because all that is irrelevant ultimately to the animal itself. Yeah.
Right. So you mentioned about being a state or national level roller hockey player.
Yes.
So is there leather in the gear? How do you replace it? I just want a quick thing about it.
Yeah, I was playing till my first year at uni. So even in my first year of uni, I took, I think a month off, and I went to play the nationals. And after that, I never went back. I think it's just because of work and everything else. And so I never got back. But I think there was leather, definitely, at least in maybe the shoe. There ought to be some leather. In the actual roller skates, there would be. I never got back and actually looked, because I stopped playing after I turned 18 or something. So yes, I think there would be leather definitely in some of those, and could be some gloves. Some don't have, some do have, and definitely some actual hockey roller skating shoes would have that leather. But again, I haven't seen, there were different materials also people use. But yes, I think there definitely is in some of the gear and kits that people use.
Right.
So once you decided that you wanted to go vegan, you had this logical understanding that this is what I must do. So the next day onwards, how did your family or your friends react? Was it okay, do what you want, indifferent, or was it no, somebody was actively trying to have you not do all these things?
My family, because I don't know, maybe I spoke to them after a while after I went vegan, because I was just not living at home. So I don't think I even brought that up with my family pretty early on. But I think at university, I think what I was doing was, the next day as I woke up and I decided I'll go vegan. So I was just looking what am I usually buying to eat, what am I eating on a daily basis. So then I saw, I think there was some paneer, and there's definitely I don't think milk that much, because I never drank so much milk. So I wasn't thinking, at least not at university, I wasn't buying. I never drank tea or coffee or anything like that. So that wasn't a big deal. And so I definitely could recognize paneer. I could recognize like, something like buttermilk or something like curd and stuff like that. And of course ghee and everything else if you have like any food. So, and what I started doing was just trying to figure out what exactly I was consuming, and then trying to avoid everything that's not vegan. So I just immediately, I don't know, if I had a roll, I would have a veg roll instead of a paneer like roll, which is just vegetables. And if I had like, I don't know, if I had a North Indian thali, I would just like not eat the sweet, and ask the person who is making it not to use any butter or ghee or anything in the dal or the rotis. If I eat a South Indian meal, I made sure I don't eat curd, and don't pour ghee. And that's the kind of thing I was just doing initially, and it's pretty easy. I mean, that's the reason, right? It's very easy to actually be vegan, because it's most stuff is almost vegan, and you can easily get stuff done, and you can find 100 different items if you're going out or something to actually like buy, which is all vegan, or you can get it vegan by just talking to the person who's making it. So that I didn't even found difficulty in the early days, because I immediately just realized what all is actually not vegan in this. So after that, I don't know, maybe within a week or so, not even a week, I think within 2-3 days, I realized what I'm eating on a day-to-day basis, and what I have to avoid. So that part I think was clear. So then I think I started talking to my friends, like at university, my classmates, my benchmates, all those people. And there were some vegetarians, like as usual, there are at least a few vegetarians. And I started talking to them, all these things. And I don't know, early on what I was discussing is basically the ethical aspect of it. So I wasn't trying to like, even today, I don't try to like convert someone, so to say. I just want to show them exactly what they're doing and what their actions are, and make them think about that. And that's what I was doing. I think one of my friends was vegan as long as we were at uni. So one of my classmates, so like we used to just go out like a group of us. So he was a vegetarian, and he understood, and he, as long as I saw him, he was never eating anything non-vegan. So he got the gist of it. But yeah, we used to debate other things around religion, around milk, and all the usual things that vegetarians would have. But yes, beyond that, I think I used to debate people in my class, like around veganism and everything. And just like any other kind of online debate, street activism, the ultimate aim is not to convince the individual in front of you, or that can't be the primary goal, because like people are invested. If they're arguing about something, they're invested, and they wouldn't want to agree even if they see something inconsistent in their beliefs. But it was for others. If it's online or street activism, it's for others around them who will actually listen to it. And even for them at a later stage to go back and look at it or reflect on it, whatever the conversation was. So that's the kind of thing I was doing. So I was making sure that people are listening to whatever we're discussing. So that's what the next, I think, 1.5 year, because in second year, the middle of second year, I went vegan. So it was a 3-year degree. So the rest 1.5 year, this is what I was doing, and I was talking to a lot of people. We were doing debates and stuff like that, like in an informal way. And that's all. I don't think, then my position was even more firmly established, because obviously, as we see, people don't have any good arguments against veganism. So I didn't face any at my uni either. So that's what I was doing. So there's no pushback as such, because people couldn't obviously respond at the end of the day. It was not an appeal to emotion or something like that I was going after. I was making sure that they understand what exactly is the logic and the ethics behind this. And so people would obviously, once they understand it, they would avoid bringing it up any further. And people who did get it, like one of my friends, as I said, he did go completely plant-based at least. I don't know what else he was doing in other aspects of his lifestyle, but yes, he never consumed. Still, we were at uni. So that's my experience after that 1.5 year with friends, with my colleagues at college and stuff like that.
Obviously it is quite like you mentioned, you can just talk to the waiters and talk to the chefs, and easily you can veganize whatever you want. And in that, I have to say that we are very lucky to be born in India. Like, we have access to so much vegan foods. I would say 90 to 95% of our food is primarily vegan. And sometimes we add something that is totally unnecessary. It doesn't even unless it's something like dahi vada or something, that I would say it forms a major part of the recipe. Otherwise, any of the parathas that we eat, any of the sabjis that we eat, the rice, the dals, even all the street snacks, I would say all of them are vegan. And talking about that, would you say veganism is a Western concept for us? Because that is one of the very very stupid excuses that come to us. I mean, we had a podcast with a famous with a semi-famous YouTuber called George Martin, a very great guy. I think you guys, if you haven't watched his video, you can go and check it out. So what the idea? He's from the UK. So we asked him, like, what is your view when people say that it's a Western concept? Like, do people tell you that it's an Indian concept, so they shouldn't come to us? So the conclusion of that discussion that we had was, if it's a good idea, does it matter where it came from? It should, if it's a good idea, wherever it's coming from, we should take it by heart. But can you tell us, like, you have done a good deal of research into Indian civilization, into Hinduism. So can you tell us, like, is it really a Western concept, or the roots of veganism were already in India from a very ancient time?
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, this is a pretty common response that people like. It's kind of a knee-jerk thing, because they hear the word veganism, they think it's something Western because the name is like it's an English term, and they see people in the West. I think like it's more popular, at least at the current moment, in the West. So they see all these things and they conflate that to mean that veganism is a Western concept. Because you see, right? Say something like technology. If you look at history, like Indian civilization and Chinese civilization, for example, were for pioneering technology for the last, 1800 years or the last 2000 years. And it's only after the Enlightenment, the scientific revolution in the West, which happened, they stopped killing scientists, they stopped hanging and poisoning them, and actually the entire thing happened. So today, obviously, technology is at a much better place, for example, or maybe more advanced state in the West. But if someone says that and says like technology or science is a Western concept, that would be absolutely like meaningless, because it currently is more prevalent there, and they did some advancements, obviously, and they have taken it to a greater lens because of many factors that were positive that could make that happen. But saying that science is a Western concept is utterly ridiculous, because that's the kind of thing. So people see something being talked about more in a certain space, or being talked about more by a certain kind of people, and they conclude from there that this is a Western concept. So that makes no sense, because it doesn't logically follow. It's just more popular or something, which could be obviously true. There are more vegan companies in the West, which could be true, but that says nothing about the concept itself. So the concept itself has origins in India. So I don't know, I've seen some people, because most people don't know this, so they think the best was vegetarianism. And but I mean, I'll tell what exactly the fact is, that veganism originated in India. But I've seen a lot of vegans also, like, even if they see this, they're not comfortable enough in saying this, because this is a simple fact of history, and this is a simple fact of what veganism is, because the way it was understood in India at least 1100 years, 1200 years ago, is what veganism is today. There is no difference. So veganism, for people to follow, you don't have to agree on where it originated or anything like that. You can just follow without having any such baggage. But it is a fact that it originated in India. So one of the examples is, I mean, this was brought up by the famous Twitter handle called True Indology, formerly True Indology and now Bharadwaj. So he posted it. So he posted it a couple of years ago, I think. And I was vegan by that time, I was like 3 years vegan. So he said he's a vegan, and he posted a reference from one of the an example basically from 9th century, and it basically talks about Jains. In this specific example, I think they were Kashmiri Jains, and it says clearly in the text that these Kashmiri Jains wouldn't even have curds, milk, dairy, or something like leather and stuff like that, because these are animal products. It clearly says that. So this is a simple fact. I didn't know this. He brought it up. Like, I'll be ever grateful, because we wouldn't have known. At least I wouldn't have known unless I've gone and researched a lot more and found that there were people. It didn't stop at vegetarianism, but it went much beyond. And the rationale is pretty simple, because it also matters what the rationale is, right? Because if the rationale is, if you say something, oh, animals are impure or something and don't touch them, that would be a different kind of a rationale. It could be ultimately a vegan lifestyle because you're not harming animals, but your belief would be like something like I don't know, a superior belief or something. But even the belief is clearly stated there, because like they wouldn't harm any other animals, and they wouldn't even consume animal products like dairy and stuff like that, leather and stuff like that, because these are animal products, which is clearly saying, and coming from the Jains, obviously it is an extension of the principle of Ahimsa. So that's what I understand. Veganism, the origins are clearly there, because that's a recorded fact of history. So they were vegans back in India 1000 years ago, who clearly understood, and it's ultimately, as I said, an extension of the concept of Ahimsa, which a particular community, which in a particular Indic tradition, which are those particular Jains, could take it to the next level beyond dairy as well, because ultimately, like, vegetarianism is also an extension of not harming animals, but it could be only taken to a certain extent, considering all the material conditions of civilization 2000 years ago, when the word was actually coined for the first time, it was being used and all that. So they could only take it so far, because materially societies and economies are dependent on dairy and things like this. So, but ultimately, when some of these Jain monks who are not living in society, so who are not like rearing cows or cattle or anything like that, so they could easily see that this has to be extended just beyond vegetarianism, and they understood it to be just Ahimsa. They didn't give a new term or anything like that, and that's how they understood what it means to be living a life of non-cruelty and non-injury and not causing any unnecessary suffering. So that's how I see veganism fundamentally to be, which is an extension of Ahimsa from the initial texts where Ahimsa is talked about, like the Mahabharata or the early texts, which as we understand societally, the limitation was vegetarianism, and the idea was clearly there that it is due to cruelty of animals you're not supposed to eat meat. That is clearly there, and Jains could take it further, that specific community at least, over 1100 years ago. So that's what I see it as. I see it as something that is, because ethical principles have to evolve over time, because material conditions change, people change, societies change, what people value, things like that, all those things change over time. So that means your ethical progression also can't be stuck to a thing that was relevant for thousands of years ago. It has to constantly evolve, and veganism, they could achieve that, and they could arrive that 1000 years ago at least. So that's what I see veganism as, and that's what I see the roots of veganism are.
Right, so like there are a few misconceptions, like the one we discussed here right now about the Western concept thing. So there are a few other misconceptions, like my shastras basically dictate that you ought to do this, you ought to do that, there is a specific ritual, you have to perform it in a specific way. And people usually claim that Indic thought, Hinduism, etc. is like an ever evolving dharma, but they revert back to this scriptural kind of basis whenever it is convenient for them, in order to justify their stance. So that to me sounds kind of Abrahamic if you think about it, which is what the Indics kind of criticize, but they end up going back to the same line of reasoning. Mm-hmm. So how would you counter that particular line of reasoning?
Sure. I think there are two parts to this. One is the pure ritual part of it, so we'll get to that in a second, because I think that's more, I wouldn't say it's complex, but I think that's more clear cut than the other one. And so we'll get to the ritual part. The first part is just general, as I said, the notions of ethical progress, the general notion of how dharma has to be applied for any given point in time, which has to obviously be sensitive to the particular context, particular place, and all the other things. So that's how dharma can be applied. Because if you don't do that, say if you're not understanding or applying this dharmic principle with respect to all the relevant contexts that it has to be now applied and then followed by an individual ultimately. If you don't do that, then you're fundamentally, what you're doing is equating dharma to a doctrine. So doctrine is something that is given by a scripture, and the scripture tells you what to believe or what to do or what not to do, all these things, like it's a commandment basically. And if it's a commandment, there is no change in a commandment, because, and especially in the way we understand commandments, because they originate primarily from the Abrahamic religions, which is like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So in there, it is very clearly defined what a commandment or what a revelation is, because they clearly say this is the final revelation for you. That means whatever is revealed, it largely can't be changed. So if that kind of a thing is being done with respect to dharma, then it would basically become the same thing. It would be a commandment or it would be a doctrine. So with respect to ethical progression in general, that kind of a view can't be taken, because that is what making it Abrahamic actually means. That's what you are a colonized person. You don't know the roots of how your entire framework operates, or what it actually takes into consideration to take a decision, to value something, not value something, all these things, it would just be Abrahamic. So in that sense, people have to realize, and Hindus do this, like Hindus understand many things in the past that were done in our times they don't see it to be fit, and they simply use this notion of dharma to say that this is my swadharma now, and this is the actual samanya dharma which has changed over time, that they're willing to realize. So that people do anyway. That's the reason people are not clinging to like thousands of years old some particular practice or something like that. At large, Hindus are not doing that, and it hasn't been the case so also historically. So people have been evolving in that particular sense. So overall, looking at issues at large, any issue, that's how you'll have to apply a dharmic principle, which is sensitive to all these contexts of time, place, and everything else that surrounds it. But the second point of it, which is basically the ritual aspect. So ritual is something like in Hinduism or any, not just Hinduism, any of the polytheistic or like pagan religion, so to say, ritual is something that evolves over time. So rituals are also not like stuck in time. Like the famous example we know is something with Pashubalis. For example, Pashubali is a prevalent. It's actually at least one of the practices that was being done during the Vedic times. So that's very clear. And but over time, when Ahimsa has like taken over as the greatest dharma that a person has to follow, over time that acharyas and other scholars have come up and have started giving replacements to these kinds of Pashubalis. An entire kind of a cosmology is invented of something like yugas, for example, because we know historically yugas, any particular definition of yuga you take, whatever Kali Yuga 4,20,000 or something like that, that doesn't match with historical reality, because history didn't happen like that. We have facts about evolution, stuff like that, and especially yugas being presented in the Puranas, which are to be not understood literally for the most part, they have to be understood symbolically. So when that kind of a thing is done, this is a new invention that is done by whoever the persons were who are writing the Smritis, so to simply make the claim that, see how big of a claim this was. They made the claim that these Pashubalis and all were okay in the previous yugas, but now since it's the Kali Yuga, these are not acceptable because there are not qualified enough people to do this. People are already doing all these kinds of things for their personal greed and desires. Like Krishna says in the Bhagavata Purana, that people who sacrifice animals are doing it ultimately for their personal greed. It is said in the 10th canto. So you see, right, this kind of an entire thing was invented basically just to say that these are no longer applicable for us because now we are in a different yuga. Even though historically it's not the thing, it is few thousand years apart, these two things are. You see, right, if that kind of a thing has been done, it shows that even rituals have evolved over time, and they are like, because you see that ultimately people have to do rituals, society has to do rituals, and if society finds something abhorrent, like something in Narabali, for example, maybe there were a few instances where people also were sacrificed. But it wasn't the case for so many millennia in the past because they stopped it. So these kind of rituals, that change obviously happens because ultimately people are the ones who have to do it. Society has to like the ritual or shouldn't find it offensive or something like that on all fronts for them to continue, because ritual would die out. And some rituals have died out like that, which people weren't finding so suitable for them. And many rituals have died out like that. People just don't follow anymore. They are still in the books, but people don't do them anymore. So that part again, there is a progression in that sense. But where there isn't a similar or where there can't be the same line of reasoning applied, is actually the rituals that are still being followed, which have a basis in one particular shastra. So if a shastra, for example, says that this is the one that has to be used, any product, any item, any dravya that they use in a ritual, forget animal products, even if it's something like a plant-based thing or something, there are very, very specific reasons for why those things are kept in that. So the change for anyone who is practicing that ritual, which is originating from one particular shastra where it is codified, that is how it has to be done, because ultimately this is a thing that you have to do like physically and do all this entire setup for that. So that kind of a thing comes from the shastras. So there, if someone makes that, aren't you just being an Abrahamic by saying that this is what is said in the book and I will follow that? I don't think that will apply in that particular instance, because rituals that are still being followed today, which have a basis, that is the nature of ritual. Even if you take out Abrahamic, even if you never had interaction with the Abrahamic entire world view, rituals are still being followed in that way, and they ought to be followed that way. So that one particular aspect, it won't be true to say that this is an Abrahamic thing, but the other two which we discussed, the overall progression of rituals and then the overall like understanding of Dharma itself for any given point in time, those two things can't be relying on the book, because they are not. That's not how they're understood. That's not how they evolve. So ultimately, what happens now? What about these rituals which do have animal products? Same example that we already had like how an entire different cosmology was invented to basically prevent people from doing pashu balis. Something like that has to be done by, again, not by anyone, any random person, but by the people who are at the helm of the tradition, who are basically the guardians of the tradition, because it was them who did it at one point, and today they are not doing. We'll get into it, why this is not happening, and why these rituals are, why the change is not happening, and why we are or a person who wants to do a ritual and why they are stuck. We'll get into all that happened with the, especially the Hindu tradition in the last 1,000 years. But yes, that one aspect, it can't be termed Abrahamic, because that's how a ritual has to be understood and has to be performed. But yes, there are ways around that as well, and how at a macro scale this has to be understood at a societal level, and by the people who call themselves basically the spiritual, religious, or what are dharmic leaders of all these traditions that are following these rituals today. So there has to be a greater discussion there. We'll get into that a little bit.
I think it's very interesting for me, because I was not aware about this, that they had invented this whole cosmology once they decided that Pashu Bali is not ethical, or for whatever reason they decided that this should not be done. So they invented this whole thing that this is why you should stop doing it. That is very interesting to me, because I didn't know about this.
Yeah, it's not just for Pashu Bali. The entire cosmology is invented not just really with one issue. The thing was basically invented to basically
For the changing times.
Guide people in many aspects. Like there are many things that not just limit to Pashu Bali, but since the cosmology exists, so I mean what it is, right? It is basically what you call a break that is being provided in this long span of history that comes to you from tradition, from your ancestors, which comes to you at one particular point in time. These people, whoever they were, who were writing this, they have realized that there are some in some areas radical changes in, like for example, calling, like even during Shraddhas and all, not to kill animals and give it to ancestors, but give something that is plant based and all, like which Bhishma himself says in Mahabharata, and all the other practices and rituals and all. So if you see the tradition that follows through time immemorial and comes to you now, if you want to show why people shouldn't be doing the same thing anymore, because imagine, right, it's not a modern day that you, for some utility reason or for some convenience reason, people would change. That's not how societies operated 2000 years ago. So when this was being done, they clearly identified some things which had to be changed, or a new ethic has to be introduced in certain aspects of society. So since that was the case, they introduced the entire thing, and like every Dharma Shastra, for example, talks that this is the relevant one for Kali Yuga. Other things are not relevant for Kali Yuga, so you have to follow these precepts and not the other ones in the other Dharma Shastras. So this kind of a thing. Since that kind of a cosmology is available, the same logic was applied to Pashu Bali as well, by saying that this kind of a thing can't be done in the Kali Yuga. So that's the kind of invention which basically, what it does is it basically saves a society and a religion and a culture from stagnation, and it ultimately not being able to engage with the contemporary challenges that it faces at any given point in time. This is the issue with, of course, Abrahamic religions, and that's the reason, unless you are being killed for apostasy in like Islamic countries, most Islamic countries, or you are basically shunned from society or something like that. The other Abrahamic faith, which is Christianity, if you see, the numbers are dwindling, because there is no such change that can be possible in Christianity, because it is universal, and Islam especially so. So that's the reason you see, if with like growth in economy, growth in your standard of living and education, science and all that, they have no response to that. They are just basically left now selling on these telemarketing channels and selling Bibles and stuff like that. There's nothing else beyond that. People are not going to churches. Churches are being converted into real estate and all that. This is the case entire like Western Europe, if you see. So that kind of a thing which had to be prevented, that's the reason people could rise up to the challenge and bring these new kinds of innovations in Dharma itself, and how tradition has to be understood. And that's the reason it is more safeguarded even after invasions, when no other civilization exists today which is invaded, and no other native religions exist today at any considerable scale. There's a reason only all the Dharmic traditions exist even after like brutal invasions at over 1,000 years. So this is one of the reasons, and that cosmology was basically implemented by all the people for many things, including Pashu Bali.
Yeah, because even the Bhakti movement was kind of like a response to the contemporary challenges provided by Jains and Buddhists at the time, because before Bhakti movement, basically the rituals and all they used, I think that's what my understanding is that I think they were like kind of complex. The language was different. it was very Sanskrit heavy, and people were being dissuaded because they now had Jainism and Buddhism, which used to talk to them in their colloquial language, and Bhakti Movement was just brought in as an innovation to Hinduism, so that they could revive the parampara, basically. I'm not sure if I'm getting that right, but yeah, I think this is a similar thing can be done in order to reconcile veganism and other issues.
I know, just tying into that, just tying into Arvind's question, I would like to ask you, Sita, like, what would be your approach, like if you are looking at your core audience, the Indic wing, the Hindu public. So, what would your approach be to them to talk about veganism in this 21st century? Obviously, you'll tell them that it's absolutely not a Western concept. We have the roots of veganism in our culture, from many ancient times. You mentioned the Jain sect that was also talking about it. I believe there are some references in Rig Veda and Bhagavad Gita as well about not having animal meat, and I think milk is also there. So how would you talk to someone who is a Hindu, and how would you get them into veganism?
Absolutely. I think this is the question that I get almost on a daily basis, because I mean, at least through my page, because I especially gear it towards so that Hindus can understand at large, or any person in the dharmic fold can understand. See, I mean, as we know, like, there are no good arguments against veganism itself. So people try that, and people might fail, or people might ultimately come to a realization that yes, it can't be done. And many Hindus understand it, because if they understand Ahimsa at any surface level, they'll understand what the entire concept is. So ultimately what they would come back to, and this is where most of my conversation with so many people, so many Hindus especially, who are vegetarians or who could be thinking of going vegetarian, but why vegan? So the conversations all surround around the single topic that, oh, what about milk? So basically, what about dairy, and what about Krishna? That's the one example people have. So why is this unethical, or why is this wrong? Okay, I understand industrial dairy, I understand artificial insemination, I understand I don't know, milking machines and all this. What if we are removing all these things and just taking the milk or something like that, which is what was done to a large extent, like, I don't know, during the times of Krishna or something like that, or for the last 2000 years. It wasn't modern industrialized dairy. It was being done basically like that, and it wasn't like being sold at the scale that it is being sold. That means that level of exploitation couldn't have happened. That's quite literally the case. So why not that? What about that? So that's basically what you're asking, like, how would you approach veganism with them? So this is the question they ask. I haven't seen anything much beyond this, because they can't make a justification for meat. There is no justification at all. But what about dairy, removing all the bad things that we see today? What about that? So, like we discussed this in the past, so what I would say, and because I mean, how I would approach in general is that I wouldn't pander. So first thing is that, like, if people see my stories, like, I would offend anyone. That's not my intent. But if they're offended by anything, it doesn't matter, because I see the reason. Most of the time people are offended on any issue, in my perspective, because I know what exactly I'm talking, what exactly I'm putting out, and if they're triggered by something around that, I see where they're coming from. Because largely these issues around politics, issues around ethics, religion, and all these things, these are like imported ideas they have about all these things. So from the left-right binary divide that they try to import to India in politics, and from things like, oh, vegetarianism is good enough, all these things, they are like basically imported ideas, and they haven't clearly spent any considerable time thinking about these things. So that's the reason people are immediately like have a knee-jerk reaction to anything around this. So that I understand clearly. So that's the reason my aim is not to pander to, like, I don't know, any one particular audience, and somehow, I don't know, increase followers or something like that. So since that is not my aim with my page, what I do is I just lay out the facts. So all the facts about veganism, obviously I talk about, I post about them, all that stuff. But whenever people, I have a highlight on my page. I think anyone interested can go and look. I think it's called Ahimsa. It's a highlight basically on dairy. And people have asked the same question around Krishna, the same thing. I have at length talked about this. So basically what I would say And what I've kept saying is that people don't really understand what they say. Oh, what about Krishna? When they say dairy, oh, what about Krishna? Is he also wrong? Is he also unethical? So why can't we do the same thing today? So basically the argument would be very simple. See, people don't take Krishna's life and his actions in many other aspects of their life and many other things that he has done. So the primary argument that I would provide is, and I mean, so they wouldn't do that, and they basically say, pull one example and say, oh, he did this, so why isn't this okay? When they are not doing this for everything else he has done, why are they not asking the same question? So for that, I give an example, which is basically, so Krishna has also like ridden chariots, horses, he waged wars, and everyone after him, before him, until very recently, people are doing the same thing. If they were doing that and getting animals killed in the war, like elephants, bulls, horses, all these animals, they're getting killed them in a war, which has nothing to, the animals have nothing to do with human conflict. They are domesticated, they are enslaved, and they're basically made sure that they will discipline, and they are disciplined, and they will fall in line so that you can use them to ride, you can use them to wage wars, and ultimately get them killed, in which they have zero part. They have no interest or no, they have nothing to do with human conflict. So Krishna did this as well. Are any of these Hindus who are bringing example of Krishna and talking about dairy, are they bringing up the example of using horses in war or using elephants in war? Why are they not using the same thing and asking, yeah, it's fine if we use horses and get them killed in wars today. It's fine if we get elephants and get them killed in wars today. Why are they not saying that? This is my first question to anyone. The reason they say this is because they don't understand what they're even bringing up. So the reason they don't bring up is, just like as I said, Hindus very well understand how Dharma like evolves over time, and they are not rigidly held on to past actions, and they see this in many other aspects. But they initially failed to see this. So why are they not bringing this up? Because they see today in the modern day and age, when no one is using horses, neither your enemies nor yourself, no one is using elephants. We have a technology that is much beyond them, much beyond using animals for our warfare. It would simply be unethical and cruel thing to say, oh, we'll still use animals and get them killed, when they realize that they have nothing to do with our human conflict, nothing to do with that. And so when that is the case, when you clearly understand that, why are you not saying the same thing and say Krishna did this, why can't I do this? Or Rama did this, or every other king, every other great person in history has done this, have used animals in war. Why are you not doing this today? Because for the very simple fact that they understand that the material conditions changing today has to dictate how our ethics also has to evolve. Because at a time when your enemies are going to kill you if you don't use animals, because you can't stand on the ground and fight, because they would run over you with all the chariots and everything. So at that point, at least there could be a utilitarian case that a person can make, that okay, we are fighting for something which is a greater principle than the enemy. Enemy is completely adharmic, like for example in the Mahabharata. So these people would not just harm animals, but they would also harm everyone else. So if that is the case, maybe there would be justification for them to use that. And Hindus simply understand that's not the case anymore, and they've simply gone beyond it. They're not using justifications of Rama and Krishna and telling we should also use animals. So when you understand that, you'll also simply have to understand the same material factors that were, especially if Krishna, who was born in a community that was reared in a community that basically was into this entire cow herds and basically rearing cows. So if you understand that simple material factor that changes our ethical position towards animals in war and getting them killed needlessly today, you should also be easily able to understand what were the material conditions that were there back then that they had to deal with, which simply, you see, right, you can't go beyond your material conditions for your time in society and your historical time, because that would simply mean to say that you are not living in civilization anymore, because civilization is extremely built around that, especially in Krishna's case, in that it was built around this entire cow herds and their entire business or their entire livelihood, basically milking cows and growing cows and using them for farming and trading milk and other products like that. So it is very easy to see why that can't be our guiding thing, because materially society has changed radically from that day to today. Today people don't even have cows. How can you, like Mahabharata clearly says that people who sell milk will burn in the deepest of hells. Like it is clearly said in Mahabharata. Like if that is the case, what is milk today? It is only a business. People are buying it. People don't have cows at their home. So how can you even apply this kind of a example of Krishna in this one particular instance without actually realizing everything else that was prevalent back then, that would make these people use animals in war and use dairy, and some people even hunt and eat animals, to your case today, which is radically different. So this is the ethical progression that I talk about. When you could identify such ethical progressions in child marriage, for example, why not child marriage today? What has changed? It's the same dharma you are following. People are getting married at 13 years of age, 12 years of age, 9 years of age. Just a few hundred years ago, even today it's happening. Like even today there are child marriage being happening. Why are you not doing it anymore? Oh, because you understand a few factors about humans, about human psychology, about people, and society has completely changed for that to be unsustainable today. People have to learn, grow, educate themselves. All these things take time. Like girls are also getting educated. So it's not that they have nothing to do, they're sitting at home. So if they study, they'll be 18 by the time they finish whatever, even high school or like something, or like 11th 12th, they'll be 18. So you understand all these things, you simply take them into consideration without a second thought. You don't argue for child marriages, you don't argue for anything else in history, because you simply see for what the material differences in civilization is today to the past. So why would you even do this? It is simply an inconsistent way of using logic and cherry picking kind of a historical example, when that kind of a reasoning wouldn't apply anywhere, and they are not doing it anyway. Hindus are not doing that anywhere else. So that's my fundamental approach, and there is no argument against this. Like simply because that is a fact, they are simply using one example when the conditions are different, and not using it and not applying it for anything else, because they understand some great thing. So what? Krishna didn't understand other things. Krishna didn't understand using animals in war is bad. If he did it, why are you not okay with doing it? You see, right? It doesn't hold at all. So that's the only way to understand, because it is dharma at the end of the day. This is not a doctrine, and this is how it has been being applied over time. And examples are ample from Pashubali to other like practices, social practices, cultural practices, from untouchability to everything. So since you don't do that, it's simply you're pleading for a special case, nothing beyond that. So yeah.
Right. So in fact, you might even be surprised that there are people who are doing it for child marriage, like the recent Rajasthan case. That happened, and then people are like, "Oh, what's wrong with child marriage? It's fine. Parents should decide what's the fate of their children and all that." But anyway, I would just ask you like a last question: that what do you think is the future of veganism in India and in the world, basically? And I would like you to touch upon that instance that you mentioned, right? Like, why aren't the acharyas of today doing what our purvacharyas did? So, I would like,
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, if you want to understand the future of like veganism in India, or especially with respect to like Indic communities trying to get vegan, because largely that's the population, right? You'll have to understand why we are in the position that we are today. Like, why are we in a position today where not just with relation to veganism, but with relation to many other contemporary challenges that like a Indic society that Bharat faces at large? Why isn't there like a proper coherent response or engagement with some of these very important contemporary issues by the leaders of our traditions, like by these basically acharyas, whoever we are, dharma gurus we are talking about? Like, because if they are the people who are ultimately supposed to uphold this Sanatana Dharma, which has come from millennia, and if it is facing such grave challenges, Purvacharyas have dealt with it. Like, if they have seen it in Avedic Margas or even Buddhism, Jainism, like many people, like all these things they have done, right? So why isn't that contemporary engagement even there? Like, which Acharya is talking about modernity, for example, like at any great length? Like, for example, Pura Paksha, which is a tradition that has existed for so long, these people had to go to other schools, other traditions, and go and learn from them completely, from logic perspective, epistemology, everything, and then go and counter it. So that means they had done a lot of sadhana and shraddha and approached it like as a true, like a disciple would, who wants to learn something. And then if you truly understand it, only then you can actually present a critique to it at any educated level, which would be appreciated and which would stand the test of time.
Right.
So that happened. Why did that Purvaksha thing entirely go off? I mean, couple of reasons. One is obviously the invasions, which has like destroyed many Indic institutions, including like many gurukulas, and especially in the last 200-250 years after the British taking over Indian public education. So that's one which has been like and overall, if the entire caste system or if the entire society which functioned on a specific mode of economy, specific mode of social constructs, which if they are completely uprooted by colonization, then by modernity, stuff like that, then it's very easy to see the thing that relies not on generating wealth, for example, like all the people who are supposed to provide this engagement, this intellectual challenges, Brahmins or whoever you call them, they are not the ones, or sannyasis, they are not the ones who are engaged in like making wealth. So if that's not the case, and the entire stream is cut off to them, where they are no longer supported by the institutions, because previously kings used to support all the universities, everything. Kings used to give grants to them, and that they could learn. Today, we know what the state of the condition of the Indian state is, and how much the Indian state itself is colonized and operating from the same frameworks. So since that is the case, one part of the problem is absolutely that institutions are completely uprooted from their traditional location in society, and there has to be some other way that people have to find to continue these traditions. And it's not just Brahminical, I mean, quote unquote, so to say, other traditions as well, like other communities as well, which are completely uprooted, like communities of like people like people who are living in the forests, who are reliant on the city economics with them, where they used to trade with the people in the city, and the UK could uphold their ancestral way of life without it being uprooted, and without them being having to force to come to cities and work as day laborers and all that stuff. That's what's happening today, right? Where people who have traditionally lived in societies have no longer opportunity to do that. So that kind of a thing is happening everywhere. So that's the thing, that's the reason like this kind of a engagement has completely gone down. That's the one part. And the second part is basically the nature of the entire Dharma Shastric tradition itself, which is basically like the people who are engaging with epistemology, laws and all these things. This is a kind of a tradition like since the time of Manu, if you see, till like medieval centuries, where we had the latest Dharma Shastras, and then we had several commentaries on them, and then several other other literary genres that all fall under this Dharma Shastric literature, where actually all basic Dharma Shastras are basically dharmas are being talked about. So if anything is being talked about, that's what ultimately guides society. They are not law books, so they can't be implemented by any king because they were never followed as such. They are not like constitution or something, but they are guidelines by individuals who had this kind of a vision of society. Hence, they put out their things, and that's what guides all the traditional schools of Hinduism for their dharmas and their understanding of the world and society. So that kind of a literature in the genre, especially once this entire traditions are uprooted and people are being enslaved and all that thing happens, they are completely inward in nature. That means even in the medieval centuries, if you see, even in 12th and 13th centuries, when like Islamic invasions were happening like way down south to Malabar and something like Madurai and places like that, that was happening. Even then, when acharyas were writing these Dharma Shastras, which are supposed to talk about dharmas and all, there is no mention of these alien ideologies. So of Islam, for example, when they obviously had very near to them when it was happening, still they don't have any mention of these alien ideologies. For whatever reason, either they felt it was beneath them, could be one, or maybe it was for their own safety. That can't be case for everyone, but maybe for some people. For whatever reason, this entire genre where traditional schools of Hinduism, where acharyas are, like Shankaracharyas or any other schools of Hinduism or Orthodox, this kind of a literature basically is inward looking, in that they'll have to be consistent with the past Dharma Shastras. So any person that writes Dharma Shastras even in 10th century, for example, mentions that or tries to make a case that this is not in conflict with Manu. This can be consistent with Manu as well, but these are some other things that we'll have to follow, that kind of a thing. So internal consistency is something that they value, because in the tradition that's what actually matters for them. Because if you are contradicting something in the past, then you would basically, it won't be taken seriously because you're contradicting a greater authority. So since that is the nature of traditional Hinduism, and that's the entire way in which traditional schools like all these acharyas, dharma gurus are following, that literature is incapable, or at least the way it was written, it is incapable of dealing with external circumstances to any great degree. And that, coupled with the fact of the destruction of institutions, the entire uprooting of traditional way of lives and all that, it would now make it even more difficult for any of the acharyas to actually interact with the contemporary challenges, as I said, of modernity, colonization, all these things. The greatest the work or response to these things are not coming from traditional schools. These are coming from academicians, historians and stuff like that in the Indic in the Indic space today. They're not coming from traditional acharyas. So that is the reason why we are today here, is because these challenges are not being dealt. These contemporary challenges are not being dealt by acharyas. They're being dealt by others. And people who are in the traditional fold wouldn't, to at least some people, wouldn't want to take any academicians' views or anything like that, because I don't know, they don't see any authority. But the authorities themselves are not engaging with this. This is a plain fact that every Hindu has to come to grips with, or any other Indic person also has to come to grip with, because it is plainly the fact that contemporary challenges is not being done by the acharyas. They are not dealing with any contemporary issues. So once that is the case, the future of veganism or future of any of these issues, I don't see it coming from acharyas, because, like, for example, right, forget dairy or forget any rituals or homas or yajnas where they're supposed to use ghee, forget all that, maybe a small, comparatively small thing. What about the dairy industry itself? Like, how many acharyas actually coming out and talking about the dairy industry in India? Like, how many gurus? I know some Jain gurus. I know a couple of Hindus also who talk about this. But what about the majority of the people? Aren't they seeing what's happening in the country? Aren't they seeing all the abandoned cows in millions? Aren't they seeing what's happening to dairy industry? It could either mean one or two things. Either they are fine with that, I don't think which is the case, or the second thing is they're not actually in the contemporary space. Their entire framework and worldview is fixed on something else in the past, and they're trying to in some way keep the tradition going without actually dealing with contemporary issues. And that's the reason we don't see, like, why are there no one talking about the dairy industry in Hindus? Forget, okay, local dairy, backyard dairy, whatever it is. What about the industry itself? What about Amul? Why is there no acharya talking about Amul today? All the industrialized industries. So since that is the case, the future, I wouldn't place it upon them to basically make any revolutionary steps when it comes to this, or even reformist steps when it comes to this, because that entire tradition is, like, I don't know, it's in a space, it's in limbo now at the moment, where unless maybe the state has to engage more, maybe people have to realize themselves and try to, like, evolve these traditions more, and they would then maybe some more engagement. But the way it is understood right now and it is conceived historically, I don't think there is any space for these acharyas to, maybe they can personally, at a personal level, make these statements about dairy, if they'll ever do that at any time now. We are waiting for that from many acharyas. But at a greater level, at a conceptual level, if they'll ever have to get there, I think there has to be some revolutionary figures that have to come and do this. But in the way it is currently set up, I don't think it is going to happen. So what about the future? Since that I don't see any great hope in, what about the future? The future is simply with lay Hindus, because as we know, see, even something like some law in Manusmriti or some acharya saying something, we know Hindus don't follow that. Like, Hindus respect them, go there, if they ever meet an acharya, bow down to them, yet they follow, because for example, something like a Manusmriti itself, it is said you can't apply laws consistently for everyone equally, because everyone's societal and the social structure and traditions are different. So it is said in the Manusmriti itself that you can't apply anything in this as a law, because you'll have to respect individual traditions of different people who have different backgrounds and ancestries and different ways of life. So you can't, like a one size fits all approach, you can't take that. So since, like, that is there, Hindus already understand. That's the reason they don't follow everything that these people say. That's the reason we don't have a pope or someone like that. So the only hope rests with the lay Hindu and other Hindu organizations and other Hindu leaders who are not in this traditional space or not in this knowledge space, but in other political and activist spaces. The entire hope would be from them, that they would understand this, since they already don't follow word to word what anyone says. They all mix and match and do what they deem to be relevant for them with respect to Hinduism and Dharma. I think that's all it has to come from. So it has to be, at the end of the day, individuals who have to realize, recognize, and do social work, because this kind of a social service is not something that originates in Christianity or something, or charity and all these things. That is something that is a old historical thing that is there within dharmic traditions, Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, and everything else. So this kind of a thing couldn't be able to be done, because economy was destroyed, society was completely uprooted. So that wasn't able to be done at a great length. But that is the fundamental nature, like, as we say in Hinduism, like, serving a man is serving Narayana himself. So this kind of realized individuals and activists have to come out, because we know today activist term is completely, like, repulsive to all the people who call themselves right-wingers or whatever, without understanding what truly activism means. And maybe partly it is true, because so-called activists in many other spaces are just hypocrites, elites, others who just want to preach to others and don't follow themselves. it may be a good reason, but someone being hypocritical doesn't mean you don't have the responsibility to do your due diligence and understand what it actually means. So the future and the hope I see is with Hindus and with dharmics themselves to come up with contemporary responses to the challenges that they are facing ultimately, because they have to live in that society, and they'll have to face all the consequences of whatever is happening in society. So that's where I see some hope from.
I think that's a very important point that you have raised. So we can end on that happy note that it is change has to come from people like you and me, common people. When we go out and talk to people, to our friends, to our co-workers, to our families, the change has to come from us. We have to get the word out, like this is happening to animals, this is why it should not happen to animals, just like we wouldn't want it to happen to us, so we shouldn't want animals to go through the same thing, especially when it is completely unnecessary. It makes no change in our lives, and we are so blessed to be in India, so that is just icing on the cake, I would say. So on that opportunity, I would like to thank you, Desi Pixel, for coming onto our channel. Yeah, DesiPrism. Sorry, DesiPrism. I actually learned a lot of stuff about the Indic movement and ancient Hinduism and how it ties into veganism. It was really great. I'm sure if our commentators put up in the comments, like if they would like to know more stuff about Hinduism and the veganism and the connections between them, we can have another conversation if time permits.
Yeah, we can do that, and people can, I guess, join my Discord server if anyone wants to individually discuss. Like Aravind is already in the server, so yeah, you can find out my Instagram page, so people can check that out. And yeah, we do this almost on a regular basis. We talk on these issues, so yeah, you can either ask in the comments, you can join, or if anything requires, we can do another discussion on some other topic. There's always things to cover.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you are watching this video and you have stuck until right this point, thank you for listening for the entire part. I think all of us gained a lot of knowledge in this. And if you're here, go check out DesiPrism on Instagram. If you're coming from DesiPrism, then you could click on one of these links. Welcome to our channel. You could just go and check out some of the videos that we do, some of the content that we produce. So thank you for joining. Thanks for listening. Until the next week, we'll see you on the same veranda, and we'll discuss some other topic maybe in similar detail. So until then, stay safe, stay vegan, and bye bye.